Whether you have no idea what a clue token is, or have Grathmole tattooed on your chest, this is the deck tech for you. Today we're covering Lonis, Cryptozoologist, which reads 2 mana, 1/2, Snake Elf Scout. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. Tap, sacrifice X clues. Target opponent reveals the top X cards of their library. You may put a non-land permanent card with converted mana cost X or less from amongst them onto the battlefield under your control. That player puts the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. And while this creature has 2 abilities, we focus very heavily on the first one and less so on the second one. I find grabbing random cards from our opponents usually isn't as impactful as drawing cards we put in our own deck. The next most important part of this deck is clue tokens, something quite a few cards in this deck create. A clue token is a token artifact clue with the ability pay 2, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. These little tokens are the heart and soul of this deck. They are both our draw engine as well as what enable a ton of silly strategies. Because of that, we run other cards that create clue tokens, such as Ethereal Investigator, 4-drop, 2/3 spirit, flying. When Ethereal Investigator enters the battlefield, investigate X times, where X is the number of opponents you have. To investigate, create a colorless clue token. With 2, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying, which is great for multiplayer formats such as Commander since we have multiple opponents. It also creates creature tokens, which is another great ability. Wave Sifter is a 5 mana 3/2 with flying. When Wave Sifter enters the battlefield, investigate twice, which means make 2 clue tokens. It also has an evoke cost for 2, 1 green, 1 blue. You may cast the spell for its evoke cost. If you do, it's sacrificed when it enters the battlefield. Wave Sifter is a really strong card when you need clues fast, and while it can be cast for its evoke cost, if you actually play it out, we have ways to flicker it to get even more value. Tireless Tracker is a 3 mana 3/2 human scout. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on Tireless Tracker. Tireless Tracker on its own is one of the most powerful clue generation cards in our deck outside of our commander. It also gets unbelievably big really fast, which brings us to the next part of this deck, cards that care about sacrificing clues. Briarbridge Patrol is a 4 mana 3/3 human warrior. Whenever Briarbridge Patrol deals damage to 1 or more creatures, investigate. At the beginning of each end step, if you sacrifice 3 or more clues this turn, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. This card has the power to put creatures into play for free. That is always really, really strong. And while we don't run any massive threats to leverage the strength of this card, it is something to consider doing if you build this deck. My advice would be Craterhoof Behemoth, since we are bound to have a bunch of small creatures sitting around to swing in with. Craterhoof Behemoth is a 8 mana 5/5 creature type beast with haste. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Fleeting Memories is a 3 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, investigate. When you sacrifice a clue, target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. This card isn't as strong in Commander since everyone runs 100 card decks, but it does give us a clock to take our opponents out with, even if it isn't a very fast clock. Ulvenwald Mysteries is a 3 mana enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, investigate. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. This card is great for walling ourselves off from opponents with a bunch of small creature tokens, and is amazing for if someone board swipes us. In this deck, it is very often far easier to rebuild if we have a bunch of clues laying around. The next part of our deck is triggering our commander, and while our commander triggers off of any creature we play, we might as well double up on value by playing creatures with enters the battlefield abilities, such as Coiling Oracle, a green and a blue for a creature type Snake Elf Druid. When Coiling Oracle enters the battlefield, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield, otherwise put that card into your hand. Coiling Oracle is a card that's always relevant since it either ramps us a little or draws us a card. Farhaven Elf is a 3 mana 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. Farhaven Elf is usually better in the early game for the ramp, but don't underestimate unclogging your deck of some lands in the late game. That way we can use our clues to draw into more gas. Thought Monitor is a 7-drop artifact creature construct with flying. When Thought Monitor enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. It is very frequently a 1 mana draw 2 creature with flying. Since clues are artifact tokens, they count towards affinity, and we also run some extra artifacts to make casting this card really easy. Muldrifter is a 5 mana creature type elemental with flying. When it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards with an evoke cost of 3. Muldrifter is another card that gets us some card draw outside of sacrificing clues. A neat trick with Muldrifter is when we cast it for its evoke cost, then use an instant speed flicker spell to flicker it, and when it comes back into the battlefield, it doesn't trigger evoke sacrifice cost since it came into the battlefield just then through a different means. This also means we get enters the battlefield abilities twice, since it enters twice, meaning we draw 4 cards. Our suite of flicker cards is relatively small since we aren't running white. It consists of Essence Flux, which is a 1-mana instant, exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it's a spirit, put a +1/+1 counter on it, which doesn't trigger the second half of getting the +1/+1 counter often, but it's nice when it does. Ghostly Flicker is a 3-mana instant, exile 2 artifacts, creatures, and/or lands you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under your control, which is extra powerful since it can be used defensively to protect our artifacts that we need. And Displace, 3-mana instant, exile up to 2 creatures you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. Displace's strength lies in the fact that we can flicker 2 creatures just like Ghostly Flicker. A great combo with Displace and Ghostly Flicker can be achieved by having either Eternal Witness, which we don't run in this list, or Timeless Witness, that we do run in this list. Timeless Witness is a 4-mana 2/1 creature-type human shaman. Eternal Witness is a 3-mana creature-type human shaman 2/1. They both have the ability, when they enter the battlefield, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. The way the combo works is when we have either of these creatures out, we target them, and then something else with an enters the battlefield ability, for example, Muldrifter, with a card like Ghostly Flicker. The spell resolves going to the grave, and then both creatures enter the battlefield again. This means Muldrifter draws us 2 cards, and Eternal or Timeless Witness can get a card back from our grave. So we use the card we just used to flicker it. This creates a loop that can be repeated as many times as we have the mana for. We can trigger any enters the battlefield abilities in our deck a countless number of times using this method. Also, don't forget that each time a creature enters the battlefield under our control, we get a clue token, so it should be pretty apparent that this can get out of hand really fast. We also run other creatures to take advantage of the fact that creatures entering the battlefield triggers our commander, such as Dreamstalker, 2-mana 1/5, when it enters the battlefield, return a permanent you control to its owner's hand, and Shrieking Drake, 1-mana 1/1 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. The cool thing about these two is that we can target themselves with their ability, so we can play them, get a clue because a creature entered our battlefield, target themselves to return to our hand, and this gets us 1 clue per cycle, meaning these creatures can turn as much of your extra mana into clues as you want. Hey, you know what's better than getting 1 clue when a creature enters the battlefield? Getting 2 clues. We can do this in one of 2 ways. The first is anything that says, when we make a token, we make twice as many tokens instead, just like Adrix and Nev Twincasters, which is a 4-mana legendary creature Motorfolk Wizard for 2/2, Ward 2. That's not the relevant part. What we're looking for is if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. These effects will net us massive amounts of card draw by creating insane amounts of clues. The other way for us to double up on our clue creation through our commander is by triggering their ability twice. This is achieved through Panharmonicon, which is a 4-mana artifact. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time, which is a word vomit, which equates to if something enters the battlefield, make something happen, do it twice. This affects both our commander's clue production. Cards like Muldrifter go from drawing us 2 cards to drawing us 4 cards. Ethereal Witness gets us a metric ton of clues instead of just a decent number of clues, etc., etc. Speaking of powerful cards, Inspiring Statuary is a 3-mana artifact. Non-artifact spells you cast have Improvise. Your artifacts can help cast those spells. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for 1. I cannot stress how much of a sleeper card this is in this deck. It looks so innocuous on the surface, but when you are getting clues the whole game and then slam this down, you can just start casting so much from your hand every single turn. Without exaggeration, there have been games where I have played Inspiring Statuary, and it has effectively doubled my mana. Other cards with similar effects are Jaheira, Friend of the Forest, which is a 3-mana human elf druid with the ability tokens you control have tap, add 1 green, which is real strong. I just don't happen to run it in this list. And Urza, Lord High Artificer, which is a 4-mana human artificer. When Urza, Lord High Artificer enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Tap an untapped artifact you control, add blue, and pay 5, shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. Which I also don't run in this list because it's $40 at the time of recording, and that's a little steep. But if you can afford it, / have pulled one, I highly recommend it for this deck. Both Urza and Yahira are arguably better than Inspiring Statuary, since you can use their abilities to tap clues to help pay to sacrifice said clues. These can get out of hand really fast. Now, drawing cards with our clues is great fun and really strong, but often we will have more clues than we know what to do with. So with that in mind, we include cards that turn our clue tokens into creatures to bring down some beatdown. Rise and Shine is a 2-mana sorcery. Target non-artifact creature you control becomes a 0/0 artifact creature. Put 4+1/+1 counters on each artifact that became a creature this way. With an overload cost of 6, you may cast the spell for its overload cost. If you do, change its text by replacing all instances of target with each, which equates to, if we overload it, every single non-artifact creature we control becomes a 4/4. This card is a great way to turn our clues into some creatures so we can use them as blockers or attackers if need be. The Antiquities War is a 4-mana saga, with 1 and 2 both being look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them and put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then the third verse is artifacts you control become artifact creatures with base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. This card is strong, but you're telegraphing to your opponents that they have a limited amount of time to stop you before your board wipes out the table. This card is at its best if you don't appear to be the biggest threat at the table. The bonus is that it helps us dig for powerful artifacts, which is just gravy. Rampage of the Clans is a 4-drop instant, destroy all artifacts and enchantments. For each permanent destroyed this way, its controller creates a 3/3 green centaur creature token. This card is so dangerous. Please be careful with casting this card. It gets rid of our clue tokens, which is fine, and gets us a bunch of 3/3s, which is great, but it also gets rid of any mono rocks or utility artifacts we run. So only use it if you desperately need blockers to stay in the game, or think you can immediately win with it, which can happen since it's an instant. Just play it on one of your opponent's end steps, then swing out for win. And that's the deck. Wait, what's that? You missed the best card, I hear you say? Don't worry, I wouldn't actually forget about the strongest card in clues. Behold, Tamio's Journal, a 5-mana legendary artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, investigate. Tap, sacrifice 3 clues, search your library for a card, and then put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. You could argue that this is the main reason to play Clues deck, and I don't think many could argue with that. It creates clues. Check. It sacrifices clues to trigger our abilities. Check. And it also tutors up literally any card we need. I cannot stress how strong having an instant speed tutor to our hand is every single turn. Generally, I tutor up Panharmonicon first to make sure I'm getting enough clues to keep searching for cards, just an FYI. However, the best card to tutor usually varies heavily on the current board state. Tamio's Journal is a card that rewards players that know their deck well and is so much fun to play with. And that's it. That's the deck. For real this time. Did I miss anything, or do you have your own combos? If so, leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date on all the new deck techs. I have a Patreon now, which is a thing, and thank you so much for watching if you've made it this far. Please have a wonderful day.